I'm joined now by national security expert and the author of the new book, The Folly of Realism: How the West Deceived Itself About Russia and Betrayed Ukraine, Lieutenant Colonel Alexander Vindman. Thanks so much for joining.
I'm really eager to have this conversation. We met face to face just recently at the Democracy Matters forum, and I was hearing you speak about the importance of connecting with like-minded folks in a way that the MAGA types seem to do really effectively, but with lies. And ever since, I've been excited to do something with you.
Well, thank you. So this is obviously a very timely release of your book, given what we've just seen in the Oval Office, the big blow-up between Trump, Vance, and Zelensky. To what extent do you think that this was orchestrated by Trump, by Vance, by this administration to really play into the hands of Vladimir Putin? That this didn't just happen by chance, that this was an intentional strategy to really blow up peace talks between the two countries?
Yeah, I think, of course, from the Russian side, they will do everything. They will seep in all sorts of different propaganda, different influence operations to try to blow up the relationship. I mean, some of the telltale signs of the numbers came in from the Russians from this Saudi Arabia, peace summit that we just had weeks ago about there were $300 billion in trade that we could have had with the Russians or something like that. So that's triggered Trump to talk about getting $350 billion out of Ukraine. But to think that it was orchestrated is a stretch. I think it's something, frankly, much more continuous with the history of U.S. relationships. The book is The Folly of Realism, and we're now in the poison Kool-Aid stage of the folly of this cult of realism, where we don't learn the lessons of the past. We don't learn that Russia is manipulating us. We deceive ourselves about Russia. We betray Ukraine. So I think this is much more continuous with that. And what we saw was, frankly, an earnest effort by the Trump administration to get this deal. They wanted a deal. They wanted it all the way through. The Ukrainians being satisfied, walking back the craziest elements of the deal, like an extortion racket for $500 billion, all those things. Mainly, they were there because this would be a good hook to get the U.S. involved. The U.S. wants access to rare earths. That's why we had this whole idiotic conversation about buying Greenland and putting pressure on Denmark. So they did it from that perspective. But what ended up happening is it just blew up because J.D. Vance was an imbecile. Trump was a bully. And this unbelievably brave man that's been, under his country's been under assault for 3 years. He's been the target of multiple assassination attempts. He's the guy that said, "I don't need a ride. Give me bullets. Give me ammunition. I don't need a ride." He stood his ground, something that Trump was not used to. Vance were not used to, with all the toadying from the Republicans, and frankly, even some of the flattery that comes from our allies, the French president and the UK president. I understand why they're doing it. This is a way to kind of manipulate them. But Zelensky was not going to let lies stand, that Russia was not anything but the bad guy, that Russia was anything but barbaric in killing his folks. So that's how the fight got started.
Well, there is a school of thought that, given the extent to which other world leaders kind of know how to manipulate Trump, that all you have to do is kill him with kindness, that you have to stroke his ego, that's how he operates, that folks are saying, well, why not just go in, say what you need to say to Trump, create some medal, some civilian honor, the first ever from Ukraine, and heap it onto Donald Trump as some big prestigious thing, and just kind of win him over that way. Why do you think that, knowing how he operates, that tack wasn't taken, that it was important to stand his ground, stand on business, and defend objective reality about this war, about Russia, and so on?
That is an awesome question. Really what it comes down to is recent history, not the deep history of all the mistakes that we've made along the way. I mean, remember, the subtitle is how the West deceived itself about Russia and betrayed Ukraine. We continue to do that. But within just the recent history, within the Trump administration, in its 5 weeks, it seems like 5 years, what we have is Trump saying that Putin is not a dictator, that Putin wants peace earnestly, saying that Zelensky is the dictator, saying that Ukraine caused the war. And then the beginning of this last week, on Monday, in one of the most disgusting, only to be surmounted on Friday by that Oval Office spectacle, what happened on Monday was a vote in the United Nations in which the U.S. sided with Russia, which sided with North Korea against our allies, and refused to condemn Russia as an aggressor. Now, some people might say, well, Trump is trying the same technique that works with him, that he wants to flatter Putin into getting a deal. That is not going to happen. Putin is a master manipulator. He's a KGB case officer. He knows that he could pull this with Trump and get what he wants. But Putin is not going to compromise and give up things that are important to him. What's important to him is subduing Ukraine, folding Ukraine back into Russia, because he has this empire building project. So for Zelensky to go in there and let slide on the heels of showing him pictures of his POWs being abused, of talking about 20,000 children being kidnapped and brainwashed that are now in Russia, to allow that to slide is not just the typical flattery that other folks do. That would be weakness. That would be weakness to his own people that are fighting, his own troops on the front line that need to see a firm, resolved, courageous leader. That would be weakness to Putin. That would inspire the belief that Russia could win this war. And this wasn't just about the Oval Office, about the president. This was the whole world watching, and frankly, seeing a nightmare situation unfold. And Zelensky, some people might criticize him for not flattering and getting the deal. The deal was important, but it wasn't that important, because the trend line was that Putin, or that Trump was going to cater to Putin, and that he was going to go back and take this and say, look, see, I could get or the Ukrainians to compromise without getting the Russians to compromise. So it was not the right answer. The right answer was Zelensky holding his ground, and frankly, in somehow having both Trump and Vance look like bullies and weak at the same time.
What does Trump get out of kowtowing to Putin? I understand what Putin gets. Putin has these long-term ambitions to recreate basically the block of countries that compose the USSR. So I understand what he gets out of this. Already we're seeing this idea floated that the U.S. should be removed from NATO, which would of course cripple NATO. But how does Trump come out on top of all of this?
Yeah. So this is the puzzling part. I mean, I'm wondering to myself, up until the beginning of this week, I was like, like all this nonsense, or maybe it's not nonsense. I really, really don't buy into conspiracy theories. Being in government and watching it leak like a sieve, it's hard for me to believe like these conspiracies about all sorts of different stuff. So the fact that the Russians were operating Trump as a agent seemed a little far-fetched. They could manipulate him as a useful idiot. They have been doing that very effectively, but to have compromising material on him seemed like a bridge too far. Now, this week, the former director of the FSB, KGB officer, Nikolai Patrushev, who is the head of the new National Security Council for Russia, I sat across at the table from him a bunch of times. He said, "We got Trump into position. Now he's obliged to repay the favor." I think that's mainly grenades being thrown, but I do wonder about this whole Manchurian Candidate thing. I think it's a far-flung idea, but the way that Trump is bending over backwards to serve Putin without any hope of getting this peace deal that he really wants desperately makes really little sense.
Can I posit two ideas, and you let me know what you think of them? The first is that Trump just wants to be part of the autocrat club. And so he sees somebody like Putin, he sees somebody like Xi, he sees somebody like Erdogan, he sees somebody like Kim Jong-un. And if he just aligns himself with them, even if he doesn't expressly get anything from it, by virtue of aligning himself with them, he can then perceive himself in that same club, on that same level as all of these guys. And so he might not receive some end of the quid pro quo expressly, but just being able to kind of align himself with these guys gets him what he wants, at least from a legacy, a perception perspective. The other idea is clearly Trump and Republicans derived a lot of help on social media with these mass influence campaigns from Russia. And so long as he and the Republican Party can continue to work in tandem, with the Kremlin, they've basically been able to contract out a lot of the work that they would need, this psyop work that they would need, to the Russians, knowing full well that they'll be perfectly content to do it so long as they have a compliant, useful Republican Party in place. And so that is more expressly a quid pro quo between the two parties. And we've seen that the Russians are perfectly content to interfere in our elections. There were already charges levied against multiple dozens of members of the Kremlin for interference efforts back in 2016. And so we know that they're perfectly content to do that. And so I'm just curious what your thoughts are on both of those, on both the autocrat club question and also the foreign interference in elections using social media, using psyops question.
You put it perfectly for the first one. I'll only add that I think it's both the perceiving himself to be and admiring autocrats because he wants to be one. He wants to be completely unconstrained, no guardrails. So I think that's definitely true. That's consistent all along. I think the second one about welcoming a foreign interference is also true. It doesn't have to be completely coordinated. It doesn't have to be collusion.
Correct.
Although there was a fair bit of collusion, obviously, in the first election in 2016. This was more of Trump inviting them to muck around and tip the scales in his favor. He said that outright. He said that to both China and Russia directly, that he's more than willing for them to kind of tip the scales in his favor. I think it's those two things. I think there are other psychological or pathological functions here. One of them is probably the fact that he is got this massive ego and narcissism that he could just change the course of human events. And in certain regards, he has. What he wants to do is everybody says Russia is bad, and he doesn't see it that way. He's been pursuing Russia for years. He's been wanting to do business with Russia. He's been wanting to build a relationship. He's been criticized for trying to build a relationship with Russia. So through force of will, he wants to force the U.S. government and the people to accept his view of the world. It's a pathology, like a sociopath would do. I think those are all in play. But like I said, I wonder, can there be more? Can it be that Patrushev is in fact stating a fact? I think again it's him throwing hand grenades, but the way that Trump is catering to Russia makes you wonder.
In the book, you discuss how the moment that we're in right now is the result of missteps with regard to Russia going back 6 presidents. But I'm curious now, looking at what we've seen from Donald Trump, whether you think that there's a marked difference between the previous presidents and Trump, because I look at this and he has a very specific agenda that even the previous presidents who mishandled this, according to this book, The Folly of Realism, that you've spoken about, Barack Obama, George W. Bush, Bill Clinton, there is, missteps notwithstanding, there's a marked difference between how they handled the situation and how Trump handled the situation. And so given what we've just seen in the last few days, curious what you think between the previous presidents and this one right now.
We're truly in uncharted territory. The folly of realism, the folly is the fact that we've been following this international relations theory of realism, which says that countries pursue their interests and their interests maximally. So nothing else matters. Everything's transactional. You try to get the best deal in each engagement, really. Now, classical realists might have a longer sighted view, but that's not what we've been doing. We've been very, very transactional and very short-sighted. And the folly is that we haven't learned from the mistakes. We've succumbed to hopes and fears. Hopes that we could get more out of the relationship with Russia, fears that somehow if we hold our ground, if we're conditional in our engagement, if we are condemnatory when they graduate from just mischief making and economic coercion, something that Trump is engaging in, to hybrid warfare, election interference, to outright military aggression, that if we were condemnatory or conditional, that we would somehow create the issue to create the situation that we're most trying to avoid, like a hostile Russia. We did that. We accommodated, we appeased, and got there anyway because we were so short-sighted. When there was a risk in front of us, we tried to mitigate it, minimize it, not recognizing how that's taking the guardrails off, breeding impunity. Doesn't it rhyme with what's going on with Trump right now? And then with regards to our hopes, misplaced hopes all along the way, thinking that Russia could, in the beginning, maybe justified in the 90s, coming out of the Cold War, there was an idea that they could be part of the democratic world. But by the time you get to KGB, Putin in 2000s, things quickly unravel, and we still don't change our tune. So if that's the pattern all the way through, 2014, 2022, 2014 is when this war really started, 2022, and this affected Biden in the beginning, especially the fear side of the equation that, like, if you support Ukraine too much, you're either driving the war or that you're causing an escalation. We're now in completely uncharted territory. We threw out all of any possibility of learning lessons of the past. We are burning bridges as fast as we come to them with our allies, the source of our strength and security. Yes, we're a massively powerful country, massively wealthy country, but it's magnified and amplified because of our relationships with our allies. And we're burning those down as quickly as we make encounters and favoring Russia, which, if they could get away with it, they would destroy us. They would wipe us off the face of the earth. They won't, because of mutually assured destruction. But if they could get away with it, they will. And this is the uncharted territory that we find ourselves in, and it is a nightmare scenario in a lot of ways.
Let's finish off with this. Is there a way back from this, or is the post-World War II alliance that's been responsible for the longest period of peace in modern world history, is that completely upended with no hope of going back?
It's peace and prosperity. I mean, the U.S. leadership has not only made us the most wealthy country in the world and allowed the American public to prosper, but we've also dragged humanity out of really difficult situations through our innovation, through our energy, through our support, through organizations like U.S. Aid that alleviated the suffering around the world. I think some of it's broken or maybe irreparable, but I think there is an opportunity to recover long term. Why? Because Donald Trump is destroying so many things. He's overreaching and creating harm that is only now starting to unfold. The human suffering around the world, because of it's going to not just stay around the world, it's going to hit home here too. The centuries, the monitoring stations for pandemics that might be spreading out of the Middle East are gone. That means that we don't have that kind of a way to detect things early and deal with them. The loss of influence around the world is going to be filled by our adversaries, the Chinese. So some of those things we're going to just deal with a new reality 4 years from now when we're faced with a different election. I think some of our allies, they're going to look for ways to secure themselves. That means security arrangements that are absent U.S. involvement. But when the time comes, when we pick another president, our allies are going to embrace us for sure, because they want that kind of strength. They understand that the American public has made multiple mistakes, deluded itself. Our UK friends have done that same thing with regards to Brexit, leaving the European Union. And they'll embrace us, maybe with some conditionality, and want us to demonstrate that we're going to be, fair, not just fair weather friends. And there's a path to this. I talk about this idea of neo-idealism, this ability to cast a long-term vision where values are central to our interests, where values actually will have primacy. They're front and center, to be able to allow us to recapture moral leadership around the world, to recover from Donald Trump. It becomes even more important. And it's not ideological, it's highly pragmatic. There's going to be a correction. Think about the pendulum swinging so far over to this extreme. There's going to be a correction. And it may even create some unique opportunities. It may create, I hope so, on the domestic front, where things that are so out of reach, like universal health care, like comprehensive immigration reform. Things will be so broken that they will need, much more comprehensive fixes. So I think there's opportunity coming out of Trump, and we will see this honeymoon, this luster, or is already starting to wear off, because the economic impacts are being felt in people's 401ks and inflation, and they could see that this guy is a bully and a brute and a coward at the same time. And I think that this is going to start to break through and people will start waking up. That's what I see happening in the early stages already.
Well, the optimism is appreciated. The book is The Folly of Realism: How the West Deceived Itself About Russia and Betrayed Ukraine. Lieutenant Colonel Alexander Vindman, thank you so much for taking the time.
Brian, thanks for having me on. It was a terrific conversation.